Hi. Today I am making a video with a very good friend of mine, back once again, and I love chatting to him all the time. It is Mr. Terrance Layhew, the man behind the Suit Up podcast, also an author, quite a prodigious author these days. This is his latest book, One Man's Treasure, which I really enjoyed. It is a good old stonking, old-fashioned adventure story. Like, I would say they don't write anymore, but clearly they do write them anymore. But Terrance, how are you doing today?
I am doing magnificent, Roland. Thank you for the great introduction. I also need to tell people you are on the back of the book with a blurb, so people really should pick up a copy just to get that.
I don't know. They'll stick my name anywhere these days. But it is, I really enjoyed it. It's funny. I've loved being friends with you and like following your career
Likewise.
and what you've been doing, because you were off traveling, having a really cool, exciting life, doing something you seem to really enjoy, which is the trick. But also you write stories. And the wonderful thing is you're not like people like me who are like so under the pressure of like, I need to be a commercial author, I need to do this. You write the books you want to write, and in some ways that makes them better than the books that people like focus so much on delivering a product. And I love this one especially because I grew up on like the Saint. Jules Verne was one of my favorite authors growing up. All of the Clive Cussler books, the Dick Francis book, just adventure books in general. And they're very different from thrillers. Adventure books are a very distinct animal from thrillers.
They really are. And I feel like Jules Verne was a heavy inspiration for writing this book, even though it doesn't have like a fantastical invention or a long lost world that they visit. It has that basic starting premise of two brothers and a treasure map. I love Journey to the Center of the Earth. It's easily one of my favorite Vernes, second only to Around the World in 80 Days, but just a romping good adventure where people go and they learn new things and experience a different type of world than the one they're used to. It's just they aren't written like that very often. So that's what I wanted to do.
They really aren't written like that. I remember I started off and everyone was like, oh, old-fashioned adventure stories. But the thing is, I think these days, to a certain extent, we have, people like, I don't know if even people like it, but we kind of get like grittier stuff and more violent stuff and more extreme stuff. And sometimes you don't necessarily want that. If you want to have some escapism, you don't necessarily want to get into like Lee Child with his characters having to chew their own fingers off and stuff like that. Sometimes you want like just a bit of sword fighting, a bit of swinging on vines, a bit of romance. And this did a wonderful job with that. And also it didn't ignore, I mean, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a second, but it didn't ignore the realities of like what would actually happen if people were in an adventure like this. But at the same time, it felt very light. And, I felt like the characters got themselves in jeopardy, but I didn't feel like something horrible and unspeakable was going to happen to them.
Thank you. And I think that is a delicate balance because we do live in a very scary world where there are real consequences to everything. And part of what's fun about an adventure is trying to teeter right on that edge of this is kind of like the Saint, where this is fun and games, but also there is that if we tip a little too far, a very real side of danger to it. Have you ever read the Lemony Snicket books or seen the series?
Yes. Oh, I love those.
I think that I remember there was an episode where Nathan Fillion plays Jacques Snicket, and he's really good in it. But there's a scene where it really, a lot of it feels this adventure theme. You don't worry about consequences. And then all of a sudden, things get very dark at a moment with Nathan Fillion's character. And you're like, oh, crap, there is a real world to this. And I like to lean more on the lighter side because I do like that fun escapism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we got bombarded with TV shows. The Walking Dead is a perfect one. And The Walking Dead, or Game of Thrones, and they're almost like an ordeal to watch because you're like, they're well written. I'm starting to get attached to this character. Oh, look, he just had his head caved in. Or, oh, look, she just got sold off and is getting ravished or something. It's like, these aren't necessarily enjoyable experiences if you're not in the right mood. So the concept for this, I really like. You've got two brothers, and do you have a brother? I can't remember. Yes, is your brother older or younger?
I do actually have a younger brother. I have a younger brother, and so like we both have a mutual love of Frasier. The funny
Yes.
thing for my brother and I is that we grew up watching Frasier, and while my brother is less sophisticated than I am, straightens tie, he and I have a bit of the Frasier Niles dynamic. So writing this book, one of the fun things for me was going, oh, I am 100% channeling the dynamic between my brother and I at times, where he's a little bit more impulsive. Let's just go ahead. Let's not think through the situation. And then I tend to be more on the opposite end of that. And really, the dynamic between the brothers, I just copied a bit of my brother and I, but really all it takes is two opposing personalities.
Yeah, and that's what you do in this book that's so wonderful. So you got Dixon, he's almost like the Saint. He's like a larger than life, suave, debonair, perfectly costumed, wildly successful. He's like the suave one. And then you have Sam's the regular guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which are
Have
you?
you
Are you Sam or
watched?
Dixon? You just said,
Probably more Dixon from time to time in like my greatest imaginings. Have you watched Suits?
yeah, I've watched a few episodes. Yes, that and Meghan Markle, didn't it?
Yes. So the one thing that like I couldn't have predicted was Suits would become popular again. I was watching it as I was writing this book. So there are a few elements where I'm like, I pulled from Dixon as a lawyer. I'm like, oh, I just have Gabriel Machette from Suits as
Yeah.
Harvey Specter in my head, as this is like he's the power tie guy who just shows up, knows exactly what to do, competent and suave in every situation.
Yeah, and they play off against each other really well. And it was, I unfortunately passed away, but I had an older brother as well. And there is that dynamic of brothers it's difficult to like replicate if you don't necessarily have like the brothers, the
Have you
rivalry.
seen those? Have you seen those memes where it's like a person that didn't have siblings writing siblings? Hi, good to see you, whatever, when they
Yeah.
enter the room. Person that has siblings writes siblings seeing the other person, greetings, whore. Like, it's just, this is the difference of having siblings. You really, it is a different type of dynamic because and I think that that's something I tried to explore a little bit in the book. When it's a sibling, you have an easier time being cruel to an extent that you probably wouldn't be to anyone else,
I get
intentionally or
that.
not. So even the little things that you can say it in a way, like there's a scene in the book where Dixon's worried that Sam's going to lose the map. And Sam's like,
Yeah.
I've got it. It's fine. But Dixon's like, you're a moron. I don't care. Give it to me.
And that was one of the really believable parts of it. And it's like, and kind of, I like the way Sam, to a certain extent, I think you could feel that he was, trying to stick up. He was trying to meet Dixon at the same level, but then he would make mistakes. And I like the way, the things that Sam brings to the equation end up being incredibly valuable and helping everything come together. And it works that way. But you captured something there with the way the two brothers play off against each other. Also, I really enjoyed it because of the fact that, in real life, you probably see yourself as Sam, but then in your wildest imaginations, you see yourself as Dixon. And so you've got two separate characters who almost you can relate to both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's the fun part about writing in general. Like, you can give me your feedback on this. Almost every character that I've created has a sliver of me in some way, shape,
Yeah.
or form. Like a shaving off of the giant T ego. There's this one little ingredient that pops in that is a small part of me. And it is interesting to see how it, from that little piece of DNA, develops sometimes into something wildly different, but still relatable to me as the writer.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that. And that's the thing. I think I found writers generally have a lot of empathy, because to make characters good or bad characters, you have to have them have experiences which affect their motivations. And so it is interesting when you can see things through the character's eyes, but also if you have empathy, you can understand why they make decisions that might be different to the decisions that you make.
Yes,
So
and I think it especially gives us more empathy for when they make bad decisions. Like, I love
yeah,
noir books, and one of the
yeah,
best descriptions of noir is you are watching people make bad choices.
yeah. But you can understand why they're making bad choices. They're not just
Yes,
cardboard cut out.
exactly, and because you see someone try to fix a problem but in a way that is unintentional consequences. Doing their best and their best really not working out.
Which is, funnily enough, I was just explaining to someone like story circles, and that's how all stories should start off. The hero needs something. He goes after something secure in the knowledge that he knows how to get it. And he always screws up, and it always blows up in his face. And that's when he gets thrown into chaos and has to learn everything anew to go back to that situation. But it's all, and I really enjoyed that. But okay, so the great thing that I liked about this is it got a really simple concept. And I think concept is king when it comes to books. And that's what I enjoy about all your books, actually. You really do seem to think about like the concept of the book before you write it. It's like Reason of Romance was, I'm going to write a romance novel. And you kind of plotted, it seems like you had the idea of what it was about before you wrote it. And I think a lot of authors, and especially self-published authors, sometimes they write the book they want to write, and then they try and think of the concept afterwards, if that makes any sense.
Yes. I owe a lot of that to John Truby's book, Anatomy of Story. In the book, he had a very simple way of starting out any story, which is you want the premise, and then premise becomes description. Start with those two things, and then the rest of the story kind of evolves off of that. And that's what I've tried to do with most of my books. And I can make the very strong argument that the projects that I have tried that have failed, it's that I'm not abiding to that little generalization. If I can stick with what is this premise and then keep pounding out what the premise is as the plot, instead of, oh, this is this big grand, like one of my many works in progress that I'd love to do is like a modern adaptation of the Oresteia. Well, here's the problem. When you start with the premise of a modern adaptation of the Oresteia, it kind of starts stalling out because all you're trying to do is then echo something that's already been done. And it's a concept that doesn't pitch to people because most people don't know what the Oresteia by Aeschylus is, except me. So back to the drawing board.
I will say that is very specific. I always say you should go for a niche, but that might be like a niche of 4.
Yes. Yes, exactly. My ancient Greek play groupies.
But I mean, I love also the fact that it's got a very simple story. So this whole idea, and I could almost imagine it like my brother coming along going, "I've got a treasure map." So in your life, when have you and your brother had a treasure map, or when have you had a treasure map? What is the treasure that you've gone after at some point?
That's a very good question. I would say the treasure I've gone after is unlimited fame and success. Have I gotten it yet? No, but that's definitely a thing my brother and I have occasionally chased mutually, depending on the context.
Well, let me rephrase it in terms of like a Sam and Dick style adventure. So there was one time years ago, this 20 years ago, I used to run a bar on an island in the Atlantic, and there was this legendary
That's amazing.
cave.
Of course you have, Roland.
There was this cave on the island called Piper's Hole. We heard forever, and it was apparently where the smugglers used to keep their stuff. And I remember once saying, "I'm going to go to Piper's Hole." And I went off with my friends, and there's this we had to climb down these rocks, and then there was this huge cavernous cave, and you had to go in at certain times because otherwise the tide would be there. So you crawled up the rocks and you climbed in, and then you had to swim across a lake in pitch blackness to a beach to the other side, and that was it. That was like the cave. But I remember doing that, and I was like, "This is my Indiana Jones moment." What's been your Indiana Jones moment?
I actually really don't like getting my hands dirty. Have you ever seen Nim's Island? In that movie, like Jodie Foster's character writes these adventure stories, and the kid is imagining that she's this actual adventurer played by Gerard Butler, who's not like Indiana Jones, when in reality she's like an agoraphobe that doesn't want to leave her house. When I travel for work, those are my adventures. Those are the, okay, if something went wrong, I'm going to pivot and try to make the best I can of it. But usually I don't voluntarily get into the weeds, literally.
No, but I mean, to be honest, I used to travel a ton for work, and it is fun when you feel a bit like James Bond, to be honest. You know, you're wearing your suit, you go to the airport, you fly off, you go there, and I used to love that. And I mean, you've been everywhere in the United States, haven't you?
Pretty much, thankfully. Obscure places. Probably one of my favorite trips was down to it's literally the farthest south you can get in the United States. Like, it's the corner of Texas. It's like it's wherever like one of the NASA things is, or Blue Origin. It's South Padre Island. South Padre Island was gorgeous and amazing. I rented a Dodge Charger. Challenger. I got the Challenger. And it was a great trip. Yes. Utterly amazing. Spent an extra day out there. I almost rode the pirate ship, but tragically they were not able to get me on the ship. Oh well.
Oh, but that's great. I mean, I love that stuff. And I think you can, travel obviously has. So what inspired this one though? What inspired the treasure map? What inspired the Caribbean?
I just had like the premise of literally what happens when your brother shows up with a treasure map.
Yeah.
And okay, what would that result in? And that's where the story just kind of moved. I had read a book on pirates. I loved Captain Blood. And I was like, what if they found like Captain Blood's treasure? And just kind of rolled out from there. The Caribbean is just a beautiful location to set stuff in. It's the perfect setting for the story. It's really fun to just put people on a tropical island. I had seen that show that came out a couple years ago on Netflix. It was one of those superhero modern things, but also had like this whole, they went to a mysterious island. They felt very like Kong, that they did this adventure in like the 1910s. I was like, okay, what happens if we set people today's day and age with technology on an island? Well, it feels like it's cheating. So instantly you just make them incompetent and take away their technology. Like, these are not professional treasure hunters. And that's the point. They make very large mistakes through the story because they don't know what they're doing. And they fail to take basic precautions.
Which, to be honest, makes it entertaining. I mean, it's kind of this day and age, especially with female characters. It's like you can't, your Lara Crofts, or not even your Lara Crofts, but if you've got a female character, especially in a blockbuster movie, she can't make any mistakes. And mistakes are what make stories interesting and people interesting, and how they respond to those mistakes and whether they take accountability or don't take accountability.
Accountability I think is what defines a lot of characters and stories.
Yes, I mean, that's it. It's like, the story circle goes, your hero tries to get what he needs, thinking he knows how to get it, and it blows up in his face, and then you get humbled. And then I think in every good story, part of the process is your protagonist getting completely humbled and having to redefine themselves. The other thing I was going to talk about, which I loved about the idea of Dixon just turning up with a treasure map, is this idea. James Bond, Ian Fleming always say yes to adventure. And our friend Alex has a YouTube channel called that. But it is a thing in life. Sometimes you have the opportunity for an adventure. Someone comes up and says, do you want to do this? And are you the kind of person who says yes, or are you the kind of person who says no? I think a lot of us these days are people who say no. But I mean, what are you?
I am very much the person who would probably kick and scream a little bit. I'd have to be dragged sufficiently into the adventure, but that also, it depends on what it is. Like, really, at the end of the day, if you're telling me I'm going to get sand under my toenails, maybe not. But if you tell me we're heading to a library that has rare texts that we're looking for, I am your man.
Yeah, X marks the spot.
Yes. Fantastic Indiana Jones reference for anyone that did not get that.
And the other thing I loved about your books were the female characters, because you've got Amy, obviously, and I'm just trying to remember that Dixon's Old Flame is called. Hang on, wait. I'm trying to remember her name, and I've completely forgotten.
That's okay. It is Mallory.
That's it. Oh, I remember, because I love the name Mallory. I love the name Mallory. I think it's
so underused.
Name. Yes.
I wanted a name that was classy. Like, that's the thing. Picking a name. I again, give me your feedback on this, what you enjoy doing this for your characters, but I really like to try picking names that denote as much as possible about who they are and where they fit into the zeitgeist. And Mallory is just the right name for, in this case, a heiress in the story.
Yes, and a femme fatale, and a very a capable, confident woman who's a very good foil for Dixon. And it's interesting. So you have two different female characters and two kind of love stories. There's the second chance love story. And then, what I really liked about the fact is that, you know, Dixon, he's so suave, sophisticated, nonplussed about everything. He's, you know, women throw themselves at him. And there's this one woman who kind of makes him question himself. And I like that. That was really effective. And then, of course, there's Amy.
Thank you. I wasn't certain how that would turn out.
That's what was your inspiration for that? I mean, you are engaged, by the way. Congratulations, Mazel Tov for that. But in terms of your young lady, is she more Amy? Is she more Mallory, or is she both?
She is a mixture of both. I wrote the characters, however, before I met her, so that's very much I can always tell her, darling, all of this, nothing to do with you. Don't ever think that. But the inspiration for the characters were, I had a couple. There's Amy has a tinge of a friend, husband and wife couple, love them dearly. There are a couple of things where I'm like, oh, that is such and such. Like her traits there are good for this. Mallory is just I tried to pick who would be the correct foil for Dixon. I really like using the Myers-Briggs as my basis for developing a character's personality.
Oh, I just did a podcast, the Hidden Gems podcast, where there was a writer who uses exactly that to define the characters and how they act. Isn't it so interesting that you did that as well? But it makes perfect sense.
It's a great tool to be able to come up with, okay, because it's function stack for those that don't know. So basically, how are they introvert, extrovert, sensory, perceiving, thinking, logic, feeling, intuitive, all of those things. Yeah. So I was trying to pick, this is what Dixon is. I set him up more as a ENTJ type character.
Yeah.
Let's put Mallory in, who helps challenge each one of those things just enough, but still has an equal level of intuitiveness with him.
Yes. And they have very different relationships, you know, Sam and Amy compared to Dixon and Mallory. The one thing I will say about Amy is she is incredibly long suffering. If my wife had been in a situation that was like lost a ton at poker or something like that, she would have straight up killed me. Like murdered me, thrown me over the side of the ship.
I very much was trying to illustrate their dynamic. Definitely is a little bit more of I think that Sam makes Amy have fun in a way that she wouldn't have otherwise. She is in the book. It's not given a whole lot of limelight, but she's a writer. She is a reporter. And so she is a highly competent person that probably fits more in Dix's mold in a lot of cases, which makes sense for a lot of reasons. But Sam draws out that fun to the point where there are a couple of things where she gets a little mischievous from time to time in the story because Sam pushes her here and there.
Which I love that. I love both of the characters. It's funny. I think the last time we spoke, I don't know if we recorded anything about it, but you just published Prose and Procrastination, which I loved. And I remember there was that one comment you got, the one review going like, oh, you can tell it's a man writing a woman, which always annoys me when people say stuff like that. It's like, oh, what, men can't write female characters? I mean, women can write male characters, and if you've ever read romance, you've seen just as many badly written male characters written by women as you have badly written women characters written by men. But it was interesting, and I thought I really enjoyed it because they seemed like real characters, and in adventure stories, it's very easy to just like tack on the romance, isn't it? But when it's part of the thing, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark, I mean, to me, that is almost the film is really a love story between Indy and Marion, and there are Nazis involved. I mean, you could reframe it. I think we said it the other way around, but that's like the consistent story through that. And I like the way they challenge each other, yet support each other.
I think that's more realistic for our relationship.
Jack. and we also bat heads and
Yes.
stuff like that. Was there another draft in which Amy like threw Sam overboard, or Mallory decided?
So the different version of, there's a scene where basically after Sam has been rescued because of course he does something stupid, and Amy and he go out. Originally it was going to be Dix and Sam go out into the woods to get firewood or something. I'm like, no, Amy. It's more interesting if Amy does this with Sam, because this is when Amy is finally going to lose her shit and tell Sam he's being an idiot. Because I think the thing that I really tried to think through is what would be the difficulty, because Sam and Amy just get engaged before this all happens. And for Sam, who has not had a high level of commitment before, this is his high level of commitment now. And just him, there were moments in previous drafts where that was more of the story. And I think I toned it down a little bit, but that scene in particular was the focus of, this is her and he figuring out that they have to make this work and deal with each other's insecurities in it.
That was another thing I liked about it, actually, because it was, you get engaged to somebody. How well do you really know anybody you get engaged to? And then they get thrown into a situation where they really find out about each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when life and death are on the line, that's when you really find out what someone's character is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There is a lot of journey as well. In fact, you don't get to the island in this book for quite a bit. It reminds me a bit of Treasure Island, because you have this wonderful, luxurious yacht, high stakes poker game, dueling and stuff. Where did all that come from?
So I knew that once we got to the island, things would start moving and picking up the pace, but I needed to set more things up. And I thought it would be more interesting to see the interactions on the boat, because you start getting the characters getting a little stir crazy. And that's what, especially Sam gets stir crazy very quickly. And I love poker games. And anytime I can put people into like swanky situations, and the way that the book is set up is, so the beginning of the book, we're told about Dix's great poker game where he wins the map. Well, then when there's another poker game, Dixon doesn't play. And that's what then invites more drama and conflict in the story. And I really wanted to work a sword fight in, and it worked out really well to have it that way.
Well, you can't have an adventure story with pirate treasure without having at least one sword fight. I mean, I think that is a contractual obligation.
It is. And, I have to have a swashbuckler. So the original working title for the story was Amateur Swashbucklers.
Mm-hmm.
And having the characters have a reason to do a sword fight and do it well, I hope it isn't too much of a stretch, pushing believability for why it happened. But I was really happy to work it in.
I don't know. I don't think it needs to be as long as an explanation. I had a girlfriend once in Paris, and she was like a world-class fencer. You would have never known, because it doesn't come up much. And then suddenly it's
it's not a typical thing.
I used to collect swords, and then when she was at my house, I was like, "Look at my sword collection." And suddenly she was like, I was like, what? And she was like, "Oh yeah, I used to be on the fencing team at college." And it's like, oh, there we go. And so she would have been perfect for a fencing thing. So, and one of the fun things about writing an adventure story is you can decide what the skills of your characters are, and then place them in situations in which those skills, fortunately, you can make it conveniently happen. Whereas in real life, sometimes you can't.
No. Unfortunately, I found most of the adventures that I go on in life do not call upon my actual practical skills. If anything, they challenge what I don't know, which is, real life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Okay. So I was going to ask about, this is a nicely packaged book. I've been very into packages the other day about books, because of, I think as especially aspiring writers and new writers, they write the book that they want to write, and then they're like, I put it on Amazon, come and buy it. And it's almost like they feel that people are obligated to buy their book because they wrote it.
Yes.
And with you, it kind of, I love the fact that you work on the concept beforehand. And this is a really nice package. I think these days, all my books, most of them get sold on Kindle, but I enjoy reading paperbacks. I love this because I had it in my pocket and I took it with me to the doctor's office and was reading it through when I was waiting for a bus, reading it through, and it was an enjoyable thing. But it's 5 by 8, I think.
Yep.
And it's
I think so.
Yeah, what is it? 300 pages.
It is less than 200 pages.
Yeah, it is nice. It is concise, and I think a lot of people miss that. Because you know, a lot of people, when they start writing, they write and they write and they write, and suddenly they produced a 150,000 word book. And you know, there are
which
people
I'm always
who
amazed at.
Yeah,
I can't do that to save my life. For me, I always feel like I'm trying to pump up the story to give it a little bit more breathing room, because I like to write very, very, very small and very, very tightly.
well, I like that, and I think that works well. And I mean, if you think of, there are people out there who they know you and they're like, oh, I like Terrance, I know him, I want to read his book. And it's almost at that point you just want to make a path towards them getting the book without them stumbling. And one of the things is they're like, oh, I like Terrance, I want to read the book that he's published. Oh wait, it's 150,000 words and it's 3 inches thick. It's like, that's more of a commitment than I'm willing to make at this exact point of time. Whereas this is nice because it's like, oh, that's a good size for a book. That's only going to take me a few days to read. I can take it with me, stick it in my pocket. It doesn't weigh 6 pounds like a crown of rose and thorns or something like that. So when you decided to write this book, did you package it? Did you think of the package, how it was going to be packaged up before you actually wrote the book? Did you say, I'm going to make it this length, I'm going to do this, do that?
I wanted to, at first I just wanted to let the book be what it be. Write the story, however it ends, it ends. I'm not going to try setting limits. I didn't want to write quite as much as I did. Reason and Romance is a longer book. I didn't want to write quite, I think I wrote 70,000 words for that one, or somewhere near there. I didn't want to write quite that much. This one's just a hair under 50,000. I wanted somewhere around 50,000, something that was just a nice, breezy, quick read. And I knew that I've gotten into hard case crime. I wanted something that was a nice, beautiful cover. And those were the more of the goals when it came to packaging in it. I knew I wanted to write something that would be a nice, quick adventure read. Around the World in 80 Days isn't a long book. You get there, you get a good story, and that's it.
Absolutely. I just, here's the Live and Let Die by Ian Fleming. He wrote, most of his books were like 40, 50,000 words.
I also don't think that books need to be long to be enjoyable. Like, I am very much in favor. I love one of my favorite things with Anthony Horowitz's Bond books is that they're not long. I just picked up a couple of first editions of Raymond Benson's Bond books. Again, they're not belaboring how long they're here. We're just there, adventure in, adventure out. It doesn't need to be Thomas Wolfe.
Absolutely. And I think, especially with books like this, is they're meant to be enjoyable experiences. You're reading to enjoy. And so, it's something that is bite-sized. It's like you watch Suits to enjoy an hour-long episode, cast over the things. You mentioned hard case crime. Oh, sorry, you were going to say something then. Say something, because it sounded really smart.
I think of it a little like with movies. A lot of the criticism with modern movies is that they're like 3 hours long. The thing is, you can only show that movie so many times within a day. Whereas an hour and a half movie can be played more frequently, more showtimes, you can make more money, which is why I'm shocked that they are not trying to condense movies to be more manageable sizes, because the more playthrough, the more money you make. I think that the same thing can hold for literature, where if I would rather read like 4 or 5 books that are about this long than only 2 that are like 4 times the size of it.
Now, you mentioned Hard Case Crime, who I'm not super familiar with, but I love what they do because they kind of seem to do exactly that. They they publish short, concise, snappy, entertaining crime books and publish them on a regular beat. And it's at that point, it's like, you could almost set up a monthly subscription where every month you get the new Hard Case book and then you read it. And, and it's almost like a magazine subscription.
They actually did that for the first ones. So when they first came out, they did do that in that function. At that point, though, they were also published through Dorchester, which is no longer with us, as far as I understand. And so they've slowed their roll, and now they're only publishing like 2 or 3 books a year. Whereas before, that first year or so, they were publishing basically a book a month. Because, I mean, you have a back catalog of so many old out of print books that they could secure the rights to.
And I like it. I mean, it is. Yeah, it's like it's a little treat that you get every so often, and you get to read it, and then you have to wait for the next one. And yeah, time is something that people don't have a huge amount of. I was thinking of television. I don't watch that much television. I normally commit to one TV show at a time. Like when Frasier came out, it was like every week I'd watch.
Yes.
The new Frasier for half an hour, and I'd enjoy it. And then I could go off and do everything else. I got my little hit, and it was perfect size. And then when that finished, I could go and watch something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that, and it's really interesting to see that you kind of had that in your mind as you put it all together and packaged it up.
Thank you. We'll see how it goes. I'm excited. I wrote the book I wanted to write and the book I wanted to read, which is good because I've read it a lot. And we'll see if there's enough interest. I've already got a premise for a sequel that I might write, but we'll see.
Will that be another Sam and Dick's book?
Yes.
And will Mallory come back in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dick still has some work that he needs to do.
Well, that's great. I mean, I write romance books, and they're normally about one couple. And the thing is, in some ways, you have your happy ever after, and then the next book is about a different couple, and the next book is a different couple. And they're all combined. So sometimes you have the same couples come back, and they kind of like have to fall in love all over again, which is interesting. So I think it's kind of an interesting premise to write stories with kind of romance elements that involve couples that are already together. Because I think in a long-term relationship, you do fall in love many times, hopefully, because you become different people throughout your life.
I think that's something we don't take into account with our fictional characters so much as in our own lives, is that this is what's nice about serialized television, is that you do see characters over the number of stories that be written, they change and evolve. I think we have an odd habit of thinking of ourselves as static and a lot of our characters as static, rather than letting them have an evolution of character. One of the things that's nice about, say, the Bond novels is that realistically, if you go from Casino Royale to Man with the Golden Gun, you really do see an evolution of who Bond is, even though we do think of him as a static character played by Sean Connery.
Yes, and I kind of enjoy that because it's almost like seeing the evolution of Ian Fleming as a person. And, he started Casino Royale because he just got married and was having a panic attack and decided to do this. And then as his life evolved and things happened to him, you can feel James Bond evolve. And that I think that's very relatable to men. And I think I enjoyed this book, especially because Sam and Dick each had very relatable elements. Are you Dick still needs work, you say?
Yes. I think that if Sam had issues committing, I think Dix is going to struggle with that too. I think that Mallory is also just enough of a whirlwind personality that it's going to upset Dix's nicely ordered world where he is master of everything. She is a factor he cannot control.
Yes. I know what it's like to be married to a woman like that. And I enjoyed that as well because, as men, we kind of thrive in having our neatly ordered world and our routine and things like that. And then I swear, then women enjoy chaos.
I think this is very true. Please don't cancel me, internet.
I always say women are cats and men are dogs. Dogs. Well, walk this way in the morning, walk that way in the morning, walk. Cats, they're sitting somewhere, they see something, they just decide to knock it off the table.
Yep.
Just for the hell of it, to see what happens. We're running out of time now. So I was going to say, what are you working on right now? Because I love the fact that in this time I've known you, you've written and published 3 books, which is great. That's a cracking pace. What are you working on now?
Let's hope I continue with the pace. I am working on a romance / swashbuckling story set in the Wars of the Roses, We're thinking
I
Zorro, Robin Hood, Ivanhoe.
Yes, now that's I remember us talking about that and the War of the Roses. Why the War of the Roses in particular?
So the Wars of the Roses is a fascinating historical time period. I mean, it is what inspired Game of Thrones, so there's that. But
Yep.
there's so much there. Times of conflict and times of change are rife for story. This is the end of the Middle Ages and beginning of the Renaissance, at a time when England, once a world power, is currently demoralized by their own internal conflict. And I think that's a perfect backdrop for a good story.
Yeah, and Shakespeare did some great runs for Richard III. It's funny, I'm Scottish by heritage, but my English side of the family originally from Lancashire, like way back in the 1800s. And so even though like my family, that's a lifetime away, you still consider myself, I'm House of Lancashire. There we go, House of Lancaster, sorry,
awesome.
rather than House of York. And isn't that interesting that for somebody who I haven't even lived in England for 20 years, but you still have those, they still mean something. And your house, your team York, I guess, would you be?
So in the, I don't know, I'm guessing they would be. So my English ancestors are from the Northumberland, the Fenwicks. So they came over with Lord Baltimore back in those days. But I'm guessing they would have been Yorkists based on location. But the same token, those poor northern barons were either, and by the end of Richard III's reign, half of them were ready to murder him in his sleep anyway. So who knows?
It's fun. I've got a friend who I work with, a client. She just wrote a short story about Richard III because there's a huge Richard III
really?
like association of people
Yes.
who love him. She went on a tour to England to go to all the Richard III spots. She has scoliosis, so she's like she likes that about Richard III.
No, unfortunately, I'm not really going to try win any allies there because I'm just going to use him as a Prince John type evil character. Thank you, Shakespeare. Chef's kiss.
I love it. Right, well, we should start wrapping things up. But I also wanted very touching. Did we ever talk about pros and procrastination? Did we ever do a video about this?
We did not. Timing did not work out very well for either of us to get that on the schedule.
No, but I really enjoyed that book, and there was
Thank you.
I mentioned how I really enjoyed Amy and I really enjoyed Mallory in this, and I also mentioned how I kind of got annoyed by that reviewer who was like, "This is a man writing about a woman," because I loved in Pros and Procrastination how you once again you seem to know the formula of books. You know how to write an adventure story. You know how to write a romance story. And the interesting thing was with Pros and Procrastination, it's like you kind of reverse the roles. So the role that is normally taken by the male lead was taken by the female lead, which is really interesting. And she's the one who screws up. And it's almost like and she has to make amends. And I find that so interesting because I think that review kind of highlighted how there are some female readers who love romance and they don't necessarily have any problem with a man writing a romance, but they don't want their women to make mistakes. Because I heard a couple of people tell me what is the thing that a man fears most of all being seen as?
Incapable.
What would you say that? And yeah, pretty much. I was going to say weak. Like to us, you get stripped of your masculinity when you are weak. And somebody said when women are wrong, that's what strips them of their stuff, because men make mistakes and they get over the mistakes and go with it. But for some reason, and maybe it is because of our patriarchal society and the way we do things, like if a woman does something wrong, that's like an eternal stain upon her character. And so you write about a woman who makes a mistake and she makes a choice and she takes accountability for it and she makes amends for it. And that's where the love story works. And she's a really believable character who goes through an arc. And I enjoyed that. But I can understand there are probably some female readers who are like, oh my God, I hate her because she did this thing. And
well,
so
thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, it was just an interesting thing. I love the way that you actually, you really seem to respect the formula and the structure of not just storytelling as a whole, but also the individual genres that you talk in. But also you do experimental things with it, which is really interesting. So
thank you.
Right. Well, I will wrap this up. But hopefully, people watching this have enjoyed the conversation. You should definitely go and check out One Man's Treasure. Where can people go and find this?
It is available on Amazon, and that's the biggest place to get it. You can also, if you want a signed copy, DM me over Instagram. And currently, I don't know when this is coming out, but until the 25th of September, I am running a sale on the ebook, and it is 99 cents. So now is the chance.
Fantastic. Well, I will pop a link down there, but do go and check it out. It was a really, really fun read. And one of the things, and the final thing that I really enjoyed about it, when I started off writing, I was writing what I thought were like fun adventure stories. And I remember I had like adult elements in it because I was like in my 20s and trying to be edgy. And there's a really good part in this book because it's an old-fashioned adventure story, but it's set in the modern day. They run into pirates, and there's a conversation where the pirate's like, well, if things could be different, you know, he could do horrible, terrible things that would make it a completely different type of book and like gritty, and he doesn't. But you respect that, and there's a conversation involving that, which I kind of enjoyed. It's like you think about a lot of things.
Thank you.
I think a lot of us don't.
Thank you. I didn't want to ignore that the very horrible things would happen, and that's the danger and the threat. But also to make it clear, kind of set the rules of the story to an extent.
Yes.
This is what you can expect from it. This is what you cannot expect from it.
I love that. And I think that, again, we talk about you package things up and you have an audience and you're providing the audience with something. And I think those rules are important. I wrote a book called Branded by the Modern Day Pirate, and it was all about pirates, but it was actually in Somalia. But I spent a lot of time researching modern day pirates in the Caribbean, and they're quite horrible, really. Where you and your wife are in your luxury yacht that you retired in, and suddenly these people come and they chop your head off and they like do terrible things to your wife and then throw her overboard. And it's like, that's not fun adventure type pirate stories at all. So
no, we very much wanted to avoid that.
Yes, well, exactly. You managed to write an adventure story set in the Caribbean with modern day pirates that actually, you know, doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, and yet also it kind of seems believable, as James Bond skiing down the Alps in a cello case. It's like,
hey, at least you didn't say skiing down a hill to Everyone Could Be California Girls.
Yeah. But that's it. You've got to have that suspension of disbelief, and you've got to have a really good adventure story. And I think you nailed it. So it has been a delight speaking to you. I'll pop a link down to your book,
as always,
down below. But do keep writing, because I enjoy everything you write, and it is absolute pleasure and a little bit of an excitement every time I get to read one of your books. And I really enjoy having physical copies of it to read, which I think makes all the difference. And I think, you know, as much as I support e-readers and stuff like that, I think there's something to be said for the old paperback.
Thank you. I agree. I love physical media. It's great. I mean, really, this is the type of book I would want to buy and put on my shelf regardless. So that's what I wanted to make. Roland, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you again for having me on and having the conversation.
Oh, it is always a pleasure. So speak to you very soon, I hope.